The hall looked like success. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, reflecting off polished marble floors. Men in tailored suits stood in small circles, laughing confidently. Women in elegant dresses checked their phones and compared last names, not faces. This was not just a law school event, it was a gathering of power, privilege, and future influence. I paused at the entrance and took it all in. This night was supposed to be about my son Daniel. He had worked for years to reach this moment. Late nights, endless case briefs, part-time jobs, and sacrifices he never talked about. Tonight, he was being recognized as one of the top students in his class. I adjusted my plain gray suit. It was clean, pressed, and professional, but modest. No designer label, no statement jewelry. I had learned long ago that real authority doesn't need decoration. As I stepped forward, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Excuse me," staff enters from the side. I turned to see a woman holding a clipboard, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't smile. She had already decided. "You're late," she added, checking her watch. "They'll need you inside immediately." Before I could respond, she pushed a silver tray into my hands. It was cold and slightly unbalanced. I looked down at it, then back at her. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I began calmly. She sighed loudly, clearly annoyed. "Look, we don't have time for this. Drinks go out now. Please don't cause a scene." A few nearby parents glanced over. One man smirked. Another woman whispered something to her husband. And they both laughed quietly. I felt every eye on me, judging, dismissing, categorizing. In that moment, I had a choice. I could correct her, I could pull out my invitation. I could demand respect. Instead, I said nothing. I took the tray. Because something in me wanted to know just how deep this misunderstanding went. I walked into the main hall slowly, my steps steady. Conversations flowed around me as if I didn't exist. People spoke freely, carelessly, assuming the woman holding drinks had no importance, no power, no voice. And that's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was a window. Across the room, I saw Daniel. He stood near the stage, straight-backed but nervous, adjusting his tie. He looked proud, hopeful. Then he saw me. His smile froze. His eyes dropped to the tray in my hands. Confusion turned into concern. He took a step forward. "Mom," he started. I met his gaze and gave a small, firm shake of my head. "Not now." He hesitated. Then slowly stepped back, trusting me even though he didn't understand. That trust tightened something in my chest. As I moved through the crowd, fragments of conversation reached my ears. "These kids don't know how lucky they are. Connections matter more than grades. My donation ensured her placement." Each sentence landed like a quiet duh, soft but heavy. I wasn't invisible because I lacked value. I was invisible because they believed I did. And as I stood there, holding a tray meant for someone they thought was beneath them, I realized something important. This night was no longer just about my son's achievement. It was about revealing the truth. And I was exactly where I needed to be. Carrying that tray changed everything. The moment people thought I was staff, their voices dropped. But their honesty rose. Conversations that were once polite and polished became careless. Smiles turned sharp. Respect disappeared. I was no longer a person. I was background noise. And background hears everything. I moved slowly through the room, offering drinks I knew most people didn't need. No one thanked me. Some didn't even look at my face. A man snapped his fingers once instead of speaking. Another waved me away without breaking eye contact with his conversation. I kept my posture straight and my expression neutral. Years of discipline had trained me well. I listened more than I moved. Near the first row of tables, two men in dark suits leaned close together. "These ceremonies are just theater," one said. "The real deals happen at private dinners." The other laughed. "That's why I donated. You don't pay for education, you pay for access." I felt my grip tighten slightly on the tray, but my face didn't change. A few steps later, I heard a group of parents discussing internships. "My son didn't even apply," a woman said confidently. "His spot was guaranteed. The dean knows our family." Another parent nodded. "Merit is nice for speeches. Connections decide careers." Their words weren't whispered. They didn't need to be. They believed everyone around them thought the same way. Across the room, I caught sight of Daniel again. He was speaking with one of his professors, smiling politely, unaware that his future was being casually discussed like a business transaction by people who barely knew his name. I paused near a pillar, pretending to adjust the glasses on my tray. That's when I heard it, a voice I recognized from the event program, one of the school's biggest donors. "He's smart," the man said, nodding toward Daniel. "But let's be honest, kids like him don't rise without help." Someone chuckled. "I mean, look at his background. No legacy, no pedigree." There it was. Not anger, not jealousy, entitlement. They didn't hate my son, they simply believed he belonged beneath them. I continued walking, my mind sharp and alert. Each comment felt like a piece of a larger puzzle. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a system. Quiet, comfortable, and protected by silence. Near the refreshment table, 2 faculty members spoke in low tones. We had stronger applicants. One admitted, but pressure came from above. The other sighed, "That's the cost of funding." I almost smiled. Because they were talking to the wrong woman. I had spent my life studying systems like this. I knew how power moved, where it hid, how it protected itself, and how it collapsed when exposed. As I stepped away, someone brushed past me roughly, spilling a drink onto the edge of my tray. "Watch it," he snapped, not bothering to apologize. I met his eyes briefly. He flinched, not because he recognized me, but because something in my gaze didn't match the uniform he thought I wore. Across the hall, the dean tapped the microphone, calling for attention. Applause rippled through the room. As everyone turned toward the stage, I stood still. They believed the night belonged to them. They believed no one was listening. They were wrong. Because by the time the ceremony ended, I knew something they didn't yet understand. Their words had given me everything I needed, and the reckoning was already in motion. By the time the applause faded, the room felt different. The ceremony had officially begun, but the real conversations were happening away from the stage. The kind spoken in half voices, with practiced confidence and no fear of consequences. I moved closer to the back of the hall, where the most powerful people always gather, far from the spotlight, close to control. I paused near a tall table draped in black cloth, pretending to refill glasses. That's when I heard something that made my heart slow. Not because I was shocked, but because I finally understood the scale of it. 2 senior donors stood shoulder to shoulder, their backs turned to the room. Their voices were relaxed, almost bored. The scholarship list was revised. One of them said, 3 names removed. The other nodded. Replaced with the usual. "Off course." The first replied. "The dean knows who keeps the lights on." I felt a chill move through me. These weren't rumors, these were confessions. I had spent decades listening to criminals explain their crimes without realizing they were doing it. Power has a way of making people careless. It convinces them they're untouchable. A few feet away, a young woman stood near the wall holding a notepad. She wasn't dressed like the others. Her suit was slightly worn. Her shoes practical. She looked nervous but focused, listening, writing, learning. She reminded me of someone, myself. I watched as one of the donors glanced at her and scoffed. "See that?" he muttered to his friend, probably hoping to be noticed. They laughed softly. "She'll learn soon enough," the other said. "This place isn't built for people like her." Something tightened in my chest, because I knew exactly what people like her meant. As I continued moving, I overheard another conversation, this one quieter, more dangerous. A professor and a trustee stood near the emergency exit. One of the rejected applicants filed an appeal. The professor said nervously, "It's strong. Perfect scores. No disciplinary issues." The trustee shrugged. "Then it was never about merit. What if it escalates?" "It won't," he replied. "She doesn't have a name." I stopped walking, because injustice is one thing. But erasing someone's future so casually, that's something else entirely. That's when I saw her again. The young woman with the notepad was now standing near the service corridor, flipping through a thick book. I recognized it instantly, an LS8 prep guide. The pages were worn, filled with handwritten notes. She wasn't staff, she was fighting for a future. And this room was crushing it. Suddenly, everything connected. The revised lists, the confidence, the laughter. This wasn't just about advantage, it was about replacement. pushing out the capable to make room for the connected. I thought about my son. How close he'd come to being overlooked. How many others hadn't been so lucky. I felt anger, but controlled. Focused. The kind that sharpens instead of burns. The people around me thought the system was invisible. But I had spent my life dissecting it. I knew where pressure points lived. I knew what evidence mattered. And I knew when silence stopped being an option. As the dean announced the next award, the room applauded again. But I wasn't clapping. I was preparing. Because this was no longer about pride or embarrassment. This was about justice. And the people who thought they were safe were about to learn something important. The truth doesn't need permission. It only needs the right moment. The dean stepped up to the podium and cleared his throat. The soft chatter in the hall faded as lights dimmed slightly. Everyone straightened in their seats. Phones were raised, ready to record the important moment. This was the part of the night people remembered, the speeches, the names, the applause. I set the tray down gently on a nearby table. For the first time since entering the hall, my hands were free. The dean smiled into the microphone. Before we continue with our student recognitions, he said, we have the honor of welcoming our keynote guest. A pause. The kind that builds expectation. Our keynote speaker tonight is someone who needs no introduction in the legal world. Whispers moved through the room. I stepped forward slightly, still standing among the staff. Please welcome, he continued, Chief Justice Eleanor Hayes. The room froze. There was a beat of silence so complete it felt unreal. Then chairs shifted. Heads turned. Confusion spread like a ripple. I removed the service jacket calmly. Gasps followed. The man who had mocked my son earlier went pale. The donors near the back exchanged looks of disbelief. The woman with the clipboard stared at me as if she'd seen a ghost. I walked toward the stage slowly, each step measured. This wasn't anger walking forward. It was certainty. As I reached the podium, the dean stepped aside, his face tight with shock. He hadn't recognized me either. No one had. Because they hadn't been looking. I faced the room. My name is Eleanor Hayes, I said clearly, and tonight, I was mistaken for staff. A nervous laugh escaped somewhere in the crowd. It died quickly. I want to thank you, I continued. Because in that misunderstanding, I learned more about this institution than any prepared speech ever could. The air grew heavy. I spoke without notes. Without raising my voice. I heard how scholarships are revised. I heard how internships are guaranteed. I heard how merit is celebrated publicly and dismissed privately. People shifted uncomfortably. I turned slightly and looked directly at the donors seated in the front row. Some of you spoke very freely tonight, I said. You assumed no one important was listening. Silence. Then I looked toward the side of the room where the young woman with the LSAT book stood frozen. There are students here who earned their place, I said, and others who had their place taken. The dean swallowed hard. This event was meant to honor the future of the law. I continued, but the law means nothing if it only serves those who can buy their way around it. No applause followed. They were too stunned. I took a breath. Tomorrow morning, I said, I will be requesting a full independent review of admissions, scholarships, and donor influence at this institution. Murmurs broke out. And until that review is complete, I added, no external partnerships, grants, or honorary placements will move forward. That's when fear appeared. Not embarrassment, fear. Because for the first time consequences had a face. I stepped back from the microphone and looked at my son. Daniel was standing tall now, proud, not because of who I was, but because of what I did. I left the stage quietly. No dramatic exit, no victory speech, the damage was already done. And the truth had finally entered the room. The room never fully recovered after that. People sat stiff in their chairs, no longer whispering, no longer smiling. The confidence that had filled the hall earlier had drained away, replaced by uncertainty and quiet fear. The powerful were no longer comfortable, and that was the point. I stepped away from the spotlight and returned to the side of the room. I didn't need to stay on stage. Truth doesn't need to repeat itself once it's been spoken clearly. Behind the scenes, phones lit up. Text messages were sent. Quiet instructions were given. Damage control began immediately, but it was already too late. Systems built in secrecy collapse quickly once exposed to light. The dean approached me cautiously. "Chief Justice Hayes," he said softly, forcing a polite smile, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." I met his eyes calmly. "We will," I replied. With investigators present, his smile vanished. Across the room, I saw the donors who had laughed earlier now avoiding eye contact. One had already left. Another sat frozen, realizing his words, spoken so freely, had consequences he could no longer buy his way out of. Near the service corridor, I saw the young woman again. She stood still, clutching her LSAT book, unsure if what she just witnessed was real. I walked toward her. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Maria," she replied, her voice shaking. "Maria," I said, "no one gets to erase your future." Her eyes filled with tears, not from humiliation, but from relief. That moment mattered more to me than any applause ever could. The days that followed were swift and public. An independent review uncovered years of donor interference. Scholarship placements were restored. Admissions decisions were reevaluated. Faculty members who had stayed silent were forced to answer why. Several high-profile donors withdrew in anger. Others were quietly removed. But the institution survived, because justice doesn't destroy what's good, it removes what's corrupt. Daniel came home late one night and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I didn't know how bad it was," he admitted. "Most people don't," I said. "That's why it continues," he nodded slowly. "I almost said something when I saw you carrying that tray." I smiled. "I know. But you stopped me." "Yes," I replied. "Because some lessons need witnesses." A few weeks later, Maria received a call. Her scholarship had been reinstated. Her application formally reviewed. Her future returned. She sent me a short note. "Thank you for seeing me. I still have it." At Daniel's graduation, I sat in the crowd, not on stage. I clapped like every other parent. No titles. No announcements. Because that night at the law school wasn't about who I was. It was about who they thought I wasn't. And that misunderstanding changed everything. True revenge isn't loud, it doesn't shout. It simply ensures the truth is impossible to ignore. And when the truth finally speaks, everyone listens. They handed me a serving tray at my son's law school event. They laughed. They judged. They spoke freely. They had no idea I was listening. And when my name was finally called, the entire room realized they had just destroyed their own future.